CBS presents this program in color.
This is marijuana. Some call it pot or grass or Mary Jane. The nicknames are unimportant. What is important is the fact that marijuana has created a national controversy involving the Congress, the American Medical Association, law enforcement agencies, and the courts. Marijuana has affected the relationships of school boards and parents, of college administrators and students, parents and their children. This is what all the shouting is about, marijuana. Parents react to it with horror or disbelief. Many of them in PTA groups or organizations like this women's club sponsor lectures by doctors and law enforcement officers in an effort to find out more about the drug, to find ways of stamping out its use. Many young people wonder what all the excitement is about. Even if they don't use it themselves, most of them accept pot smoking among their friends with a tolerance the rest of society finds hard to understand. In spite of the reaction, or because of it, the use of the drug has grown so that in the past 4 years, marijuana arrests have increased by an estimated 500%. Marijuana comes from the tops of the female hemp plant, Cannabis sativa. Though it grows as a weed in many parts of the United States, the most potent variety comes from more tropical climates. It can be rolled into cigarettes, smoked in pipes. Occasionally, it is used to spice salads or as an ingredient in desserts. A few years ago, it was a drug associated in the public mind with crimes of violence, with narcotics addiction, a drug used only by society's outsiders, the very poor, minority groups in the big city ghettos. Marijuana has now become an escape for the middle class. In any metropolitan area, it is relatively easy to buy, not openly on street corners, but with the right contacts or a little discreet inquiry, the drug can be found. It has drifted from the college campus to the junior high school, from the GI in Vietnam to the career girl at home. Why do you smoke marijuana?
It's really very simple. I smoke it because I enjoy it, because it gives me pleasure, because I think it helps to make me happy. I don't think it's a soma from Brave New World, because I don't think it induces oblivion. I don't think it makes my mind go to pieces. I don't think it's a false sense of security or happiness. I think that it's something that after hours, on weekends, is a help towards enjoying oneself. I think anybody who lives in any kind of urban area is subject to unbelievable burdens in living. If our pace of living was not so great, then I would say pot would probably disappear.
This girl is one of an estimated 6 to 12 million Americans who use or have used marijuana. She represents a point of view we shall explore in the next hour as we examine the medical, legal, and social aspects of the marijuana phenomenon.
CBS reports marijuana with CBS News correspondent Mike Wallace. This broadcast is brought to you by...
It is easy to recognize the reasons for society's doubts and confusion about marijuana. It is a subject long surrounded by myth, fear, and misunderstanding. A subject that almost automatically draws a response more emotional than reasoned. Marijuana is a scare word in our society. In preparing this broadcast, we've encountered a reluctance to discuss the subject publicly on the part of many authorities, including government officials, concerned about the reaction of an uninformed and hostile public, afraid that what they say will be misunderstood or misinterpreted as condoning drug abuse, fearful of appearing too permissive. Many have chosen to remain silent. It is true that for all its widespread use, very little is known about marijuana. There are few proven facts, almost no definitive answers, and a great deal of opinion, expert opinion, that conflicts and contradicts and makes for even more confusion. One of the few incontrovertible facts is that an increasing number of people are questioning custom and convention, rejecting inherited assumptions, yesterday's truth, and they are willing to defy the law. Marijuana advocates, whether from the college campus or from the less visible, less publicized, middle-aged, middle class, are questioning the value system of a society that consumes staggering amounts of alcohol and other assorted drugs every year, and at the same time jails people for using a drug many consider far less harmful. One of those advocates is this young lady. She is in her mid-20s, college educated, works for a national magazine.
I don't want to rave about pot because I don't think it's such a big deal. The only thing that makes it a big deal is that it's illegal. It's that people can go to jail for it. And that to me is immoral. That makes it a big deal. I mean, pot in itself is innocuous.
It doesn't worry you that you're breaking the law?
Sure, it worries me. I mean, it worries me because I don't want to get caught. I do not want to go to jail for something that I can consider a pleasure and harmless to both society and myself. I'm not hurting anybody. I'm not hurting myself. Why should I be punished for it?
And no dangers, as far as you're concerned. You're not worried about it at all.
No more than I'm worried about alcohol or the junk that doctors give housewives who are pill freaks. In fact, less, because at least with marijuana, you're not lying to yourself and saying your doctor gave you all these little things, or you're drinking alcohol and lying to yourself about what you're doing.
You know that there is a considerable body of medical opinion that disagrees with you.
I'll tell you something. I think that the medical profession has been brainwashed as well as anybody else. There are doctors who don't know about it because there hasn't even been research. I mean, I would seriously question doctors who get up there and start mouthing off about marijuana when there hasn't even been one decent scientific investigation of marijuana. There's been more investigation into LSD than into marijuana. How dare they get up and start talking about the medical effects of marijuana when it's obviously as shallow as if some taxi driver got up and talked about marijuana. Except that one is a more specialized intelligence. That's all.
Dr. Henry Brill, Vice Chairman of the New York State Narcotics Control Commission.
I think it's possible to take marijuana and get away with it. I think it's been demonstrated by many people. I think it's possible to take marijuana and get into trouble with it, so that it is not the most dangerous of all drugs by any means. Heroin is more dangerous, cocaine is more dangerous, LSD is more dangerous.
Alcohol?
I'm not sure that anyone has made a good comparative evaluation of these two very different drugs. I'm not sure which is more dangerous. But it is dangerous, and so long as we have a choice not to turn it loose, I would be strongly in favor of not turning it loose until we know that it's safe.
Is marijuana as menacing to the individual and to society as my generation was led to believe?
I think our generation was led to believe that this led to a wave of rape, arson, violence, all sorts of things. There were gross exaggerations. This obviously was not true, and it's well understood now that it isn't true. But at the same time, that does not make marijuana a safe drug.
Dr. Brill, the young people of this country hear over and over again from medical authorities, legal authorities about the dangers of the use of marijuana, and yet they don't seem to be buying what they hear.
And the reason why they don't buy it is that they're committing a very primitive error in pharmacology. They're basing their conclusions on what they see in the street, what they see among their own associates. They don't see the dropouts, they don't see the complications, all they see are the people that get away with things. You have to find out how many people don't get away with it. And it's the ones that don't get away with it that are the concern of the medical profession, because we are the ones who are asked to pick up the pieces, and we see the catastrophes.
These are the catastrophes. His name is Edwin. He's 14. He started using marijuana when he was 11. He told us he wanted to be like the other fellows, part of the crowd. He was addicted to heroin by the time he was 13. This is Jay. He's 16. He started using marijuana when he was 11, heroin at 13. Roberta, she's 15 now, started smoking marijuana at 13. It wasn't enough, she said, so she began using heroin at 14. They are all residents of Phoenix House, a voluntary rehabilitation center for drug addicts in New York City. They are not all from ghettos or from minority groups. Judy didn't use marijuana until she was in her last year of college. Her friends were using it, and she was curious. By the time she started teaching high school, she had also started using LSD, amphetamines, barbiturates, and heroin. Howard Josepher, his background is middle class too, but his reasons for smoking pot were the same as a teenager from the slums.
I think most of us felt that there's something more to life, something we were missing. I think this kick or this gratification or this escape that we were looking for was, we were trying to fill it up with drugs, with marijuana to start with, and it didn't get it. And once you go outside yourself for relief of whatever it is you feel you're lacking, the individual is lacking, you're missing the whole thing.
How did it all begin, Mr. Josepher?
I sort of did it occasionally in college. When I graduated college, the reality of the situation that I had to go out and make it in this world sort of became a little bit too much, I guess. I started to smoke more pot. I started to take mescaline. I started to take LSD. After about 6 or 7 months of this marijuana and LSD, I went on to heroin.
The people that you know, the people you work with here at Phoenix House, did they come, most of them, by the same route?
Of the about 400 people that live in Phoenix houses at this time, I would say 398 started with marijuana. People could say that it's not addictive, that it's not harmful, for physiological reasons, whatever they can come up with. But there's a very stark reality in Phoenix House, and it's something that we cannot ignore.
398 of the 400 addicts here began by using marijuana. This is the kind of statistic that people find so frightening. It's the key to the concern of so many parents who wonder what marijuana may lead to, and the fact is nobody knows. The stepping stone theory that marijuana is a prelude to the use of other, more dangerous drugs cannot be dismissed as easily as some suggest. For even though the use of heroin has remained relatively stable, while the use of marijuana has risen sharply, it is not uncommon for pot, LSD, amphetamines, and barbiturates to be used by the same people. But while it is a fact that most heroin users began by using marijuana, there is no chemical, no physiological connection, as the AMA has pointed out, between the two drugs. Nothing in marijuana creates a need for other, stronger drugs. Unlike heroin, marijuana is not physically addictive. It does not develop in the user a tolerance or a need for ever-increasing doses for satisfaction. Like the social drinker who becomes an alcoholic, the marijuana smoker may go on to more dangerous drugs, but one does not necessarily follow the other. It is the personality of the user, then, not the marijuana itself, that leads to other forms of drug abuse.
Strangely enough, although marijuana has been around for centuries, scientists still know less about it than they do about LSD. Nearly all the evidence about marijuana's long-term effects has come from other countries, countries where it is used in stronger forms than in the United States. Until marijuana became a middle-class phenomenon in this country, there was little pressure for scientific investigation. In 1963, there were only 4 American scientists licensed to perform marijuana research. Now, the public demand for answers, for fact instead of opinion, has led the National Institute of Mental Health to put up $4 million over the next 2 years for marijuana research. Most of the studies will be conducted with a chemical synthetic, tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, the ingredient of marijuana that is believed to cause hallucinations. Here at the University of Chicago Hospital, tests are being conducted to find out where THC acts in the brain, how it affects the brain system of transmission of information, how it affects behavior. The mice receiving controlled doses of THC become passive, drowsy. They fall asleep. Researchers have known for some time that in humans, marijuana causes distortions in time and space perception, posing dangers in driving or any skilled activity. It also causes a loss of muscular control, The mouse injected with THC is unable to keep a grip on the slide. Analysis of the brains of mice receiving the marijuana extract revealed definite chemical changes. What dangers there are in those changes, what their long-range effects may be, will not be known for years. There are a very few medical research projects now being conducted with human volunteers. This one in Palo Alto, California's Veterans Hospital is administered by Dr. Leo Hollister. The volunteer is Hampton Gillespie, a graduate student and research assistant. He has never smoked marijuana. The THC, the chemical extract, is clear and colorless. The dose is high, the equivalent of approximately 3 marijuana cigarettes. The taste leaves something to be desired.
Hamp, it's now 1/2 hour after you've had the drug, and I wonder if you could tell us how you feel about now.
Well, the effects of the drug are very much with me, and it's exactly what I had hoped to expect, which makes me very elated in a way. It makes you it makes like you're heavy with drugs, with medication, and you want to sleep, and you're just about ready to go to sleep, and you're very sleepy, and you're going over this cliff, and you wait to fall. Well, not fall unpleasantly, but drift.
It's a pleasant feeling.
Extremely so.
Very pleasant feeling. Do you feel that you could function in society and do normal tasks as you would every day?
Mm-mm.
Is there any difference in your feeling of light or darkness or colors? That's the same.
It's busy.
Hamp, it's now about 1.5 hours since you've had the drug. How do you feel now?
It's been longer than 1.5 hours. It's been for a long time.
That's how you feel now.
Hi. I thought I tried to explain it once before, but it's like I'm not here. I can just cut you off.
Do you feel any sensation in your body that's different than you
Warm.
feel? Warm.
Red, 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 red. Warm, 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 warm.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel you could go out and walk around or carry on a normal conversation with anyone?
I couldn't carry on a conversation, and I don't want to carry on a conversation. I just want to jump.
The THC lowers the blood pressure and stimulates respiration. It increases appetite, and there is a characteristic reddening of the eyes. Most subjects feel weaker, and they do not do as well on performance tests as they did before taking the drug. In outward appearance, the effect of THC resembles alcoholic intoxication, which Dr. Hollister suspects accounts for much of marijuana's popularity.
Close your eyes. Hamp, it's been almost 3 hours. How do you feel?
I'm just not with you. I just float. But it's pleasant for a while, but I cannot think of reality. If you ask me to relate something and say that it is my job, which is this, I couldn't relate them.
Well, you think you're not thinking as clearly as you normally might, then?
I think like I'm in a Botticelli painting. So how can I think like I am here when you're in a Botticelli painting?
Well,
It sold for $280,000. Saw it in the catalog. It was bought by John Paul Getty.
All right. Well,
It's pretty. I'm in it.
Are you happy?
If you're in a Botticelli painting, you're happy.
We said that Hamp was given a high dose of THC, the equivalent of 3 marijuana cigarettes. The effect lasted for about 5 hours. He told us later that he never wanted to try it again. He felt defenseless, a feeling few people enjoy. For further perspective on the medical aspect of marijuana use, correspondent Daniel Shore talked to Dr. Stanley Yolis, director of the National Institute of Mental Health.
We have found that a fair percentage of heroin users have used marijuana, among other substances, before becoming addicted to heroin.
However, we also know from studies, worldwide studies that have been done, that there is really no link, direct causative link between the use of marijuana and the use of heroin following it.
What is it that's created the impression that marijuana is a dangerous drug?
I think in the popular notion, which has been circulating, that marijuana itself gives rise to heroin use, and that it also gives rise to criminality, that people who use marijuana go on to lives of crime and distorted sexuality.
Is there any evidence that the use of marijuana is associated with criminality or distorted sexuality?
There is precious little evidence to prove those 2 points. There have been word-of-mouth associations, but in every study that I am aware of, scientifically controlled, the only conclusion that one could arrive at, and which is the conclusion that the President's Commission on Law Enforcement arrived at, is not proven.
Am I going too far, then, in saying that there is no scientific evidence that marijuana does any harm at all?
A little. I think you're proceeding too rapidly. It does not really take into account the danger, and it's a clear danger, of what may happen with prolonged use of the drug. We really do not know from any carefully controlled studies what will happen. We are very much concerned, however, because of the analogy to long-continued tobacco use. For many, many years, tobacco was considered to be a mild stimulant with no ill effect on the individual user. Well, we know differently today.
No one doubts the need for more research before a definitive medical conclusion can be drawn about marijuana, but some things do seem apparent even now. Marijuana is not the menace we once believed, but that does not make it a safe or innocuous drug. As the American Medical Association recently reported, marijuana can be dangerous, and its widespread use presents the possibility of serious individual and social consequences. Marijuana is not physically addictive, but it can produce a psychological dependence. It can, like cigarettes, be habit-forming. The effect of marijuana, like any drug, depends upon the physical and psychological makeup of the user. For most, it is a mild hallucinogen, but others will go on to other drugs, and a few may even have psychotic episodes. Marijuana may, after research, prove to be no more harmful than alcohol. But that is faint praise, for there are, after all, more than 6 million alcoholics in this country. And finally, in spite of the fact that the search for indisputable evidence about marijuana has just begun, many doctors, indeed the American Medical Association itself, feel they know enough now to question the wisdom of the severe legal penalties for using marijuana. And we'll return with a look at some of the legal aspects of the marijuana story in a moment. Marijuana was first introduced into this country by Mexican laborers back in the 1920s. It was legal then. As its use spread to the urban ghettos of the North and during the crime waves of the 30s, federal prohibition authorities launched a campaign against it, branding it the killer drug. The Bureau of Narcotics warned that one marijuana cigarette could develop in a man a homicidal mania, probably to kill his brother. In 1937, marijuana was made illegal under federal law, and the states enacted legislation of their own. For the most part, the penalties prescribed are the same as those for addictive drugs like heroin and cocaine. Those penalties, both federal and state, are stiff. Up to 10 years for possession under federal law, life in prison in some states for sale to a minor. Today, more and more observers question whether the penalties are not much too severe, whether laws broken so often by so many normally law-abiding people can be enforced.
Most of the marijuana smuggled into the United States comes from Mexico, where it is also illegal, but where thousands of acres are nonetheless planted every year. It is the major cash crop in some areas of that country in spite of the law. Periodically, the Mexican government raids the marijuana fields to confiscate and burn the crop. The aim? to discourage violators of the law and to show cooperation with American narcotics agencies. Some authorities are skeptical and feel it is little more than token control, an annual show put on for the press. No matter what the intention, it keeps only a fraction of the drug off the market. Nobody knows just how much marijuana is smuggled into this country. Much of the border with Mexico is open, defined only by strands of barbed wire fencing, easily crossed. Smuggling is widespread and growing. This is the border checkpoint in San Ysidro, California, across the border from Tijuana. 8 tons of marijuana were confiscated in this one place last year. The illegal traffic is lucrative. Americans now spend $100 million on marijuana each year. Contrary to popular belief, organized crime, the mafia, is not involved in the smuggling or the sale of marijuana. For big-time gangsters, the profit in marijuana is too small. And there are so many amateurs, students, tourists. Anyone with a car can be a marijuana trafficker. 11 million cars go through this checkpoint every year. Some of them are mules, hired drivers with big payloads to be delivered to dealers in the States. On any given day, customs agents will make several arrests involving cars like this one, packed with marijuana. This car is the product of a Tijuana body shop specializing in custom smuggling compartments. This is marijuana by the brick. One of them may be bought for $30 in Mexico. It will bring about $70 in Los Angeles. Broken down into bags and sold by the ounce, one of these bricks may be worth $250. There were over 100 bricks in this one car. So much has been confiscated that this Customs Department storehouse in San Diego now contains 19 tons of marijuana, all of it to be used as evidence in cases pending trial on federal charges. Last year in California alone, marijuana arrests of people under 18 increased by 180%. Drug arrests in Baltimore, Maryland were up 400%. Marijuana use among GIs in Vietnam has risen sharply. These statistics have prompted a number of congressional committees to examine the inconsistencies in a jungle of drug laws, to seek new ways of controlling drug abuse. A favorite witness at their hearings has been Dr. James Goddard, former head of the Food and Drug Administration. Several months ago, Dr. Goddard was quoted as saying, "Whether or not marijuana is more dangerous than alcohol is debatable. I don't happen to think it is." Though he said later that he had been quoted out of context, the public reaction to that report was sharp, and its effect was felt in a number of government agencies for months. There were calls for Dr. Goddard's immediate resignation. CBS News discovered that government officials became reluctant to discuss marijuana publicly. Many who shared Dr. Goddard's feeling or who advocated more liberal laws suddenly felt threatened. One of few public discussions by federal officials since then was a series of Senate hearings by Senator Thomas Dodd's Juvenile Delinquency Subcommittee. Senator Edward Kennedy asked Dr. Goddard about recent proposals for stiffer penalties for various forms of drug abuse.
Do you think that these kind of laws are going to inspire the confidence of young people? Are they going to pay any more attention to
I don't believe
this
they will.
legislation than they are to the one that's already on the book?
No, sir, I don't believe they will. I believe our approach, which I'm happy to say will be continued, the educational approach, the approach through research, will, in the long run, have the greatest impact. I don't believe this will gain the respect of young people.
So you have, even though the marijuana, from your own testimony, is certainly less dangerous, you have a more severe penalty than you'd have for LSD, which is considerably more dangerous. And then what we're asking is for the young people to try and comply with this kind of legislative jumble.
It would be my opinion, Senator, that they don't view this drug as being dangerous, that in using it, perhaps they're expressing their rebellion against our society and against the establishment, as they put it. Now, I'm not so certain that this is different than the youth of the 20s who expressed their rebellion in using alcohol, which was forbidden under the Volstead Act at that time. It's a different medium of expression, perhaps, more significant than the fact that it occurs.
An opposing view, by Federal Narcotics Bureau Commissioner Henry Giordano.
I can't see how you can control a substance. In other words, you expect it's a dangerous substance. The public doesn't want it used and abused. They want to keep it away from people, and you can't in any way keep a drug away and try to reduce the availability without being able to have a penalty for someone that's in possession of large quantities. You have to have a possession penalty for heroin and narcotics. You have to have a possession penalty for marijuana, or you're not going to be able to control the traffickers.
We've heard testimony here that despite these severe penalties attached by law, there's an ever-increasing amount of abuse with this drug. The penalty isn't very much of a deterrent.
Well, I attempted to explain why I felt there was an increase, and I suppose I should have added to that, and this is in spite of the penalties. And I think that if we didn't have the penalties, the problem would even be 10 times worse than it is and increasing.
Well, you can see what a problem we have. Here's a man like Dr. Goddard who just takes the completely opposite view. And Dr. Newz, and I'm sure there are others. Do you consider these two critics qualified?
Well, I certainly feel that they're qualified, but I think, just like anything else, I don't necessarily agree with their conclusions. I'm saying we hold the line with what we've got.
As congressional committees deliberate on new legislation, society's confusion and concern can also be seen on the state level. In California, the legislature recently amended the law to reduce some penalties for possession of marijuana, to permit judges there more discretion in fixing a punishment. But in New York State, the legislature recently voted for a bill substantially increasing penalties for sale and possession, an increase that would make the sale of marijuana to anyone under 21 punishable by life in prison. Though Governor Nelson Rockefeller has vetoed the bill, it will be reintroduced next year. The sponsor of the legislation, Senator Edward Lentall.
We have developed in this country a permissive attitude toward many things, including marijuana. If people want to do it, that's their business, let them do it. I think this permissive attitude is hurting our country, and I think we've got to get away from it, because if we carry that to its logical and natural extreme, there are many things that are wrong, that people like to do, that people would like to have the right to do. We might just as well legalize all of the things and even take our moral law and throw it out the window and say that there aren't any morals. Marijuana is a menace, and it is my purpose to stamp out its use, and to especially stamp out the pusher that is pushing marijuana on our youth under 21 years of age, who look for kicks, and when the kick becomes insufficient, look to stronger narcotics and become addicted with heroin or cocaine or any of the others.
The judiciary already has the stiff penalties that they can hand down, but they're not doing it. Why?
I don't know the answer to it. It may be that they believe that this permissive attitude that seems to have pervaded our country is the wish of the people. And until we can show them to the contrary, they'll continue to deal with this problem as a social problem, as a psychiatric problem, as a psychological problem. I'm saying to them, it's time that you use the stick. It's time you got a little tough with these people.
Though punishment for marijuana violations vary, the most severe penalties are reserved for sale to a minor. Sam Williams was convicted of selling one marijuana cigarette to a 17-year-old boy in the state of Washington. He was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years and a maximum of 40 years in prison. His attorney is basing his appeal on the grounds of cruel and unusual punishment. Washington state law also says that conviction for simple possession of marijuana means a sentence of from 5 to 20 years in prison. Though he is free on bail pending appeal, the possible prison term hangs heavily over Chris Hawkins, shown here with Mrs. Hawkins.
Since we don't know whether he's going to go to jail for sure, it's been hard to plan anything, so we're just in suspension these past two years.
It just isn't human nature to have somebody put away for their first offense for something like this. For 20 years, that's a big chunk out of a man's life. It's pretty scary, really.
I think it's much too strict. He didn't do that much that he should be punished for 5 years. When we were up there, there was a boy that murdered his mother, and he got 7 years for it. And the same judge that sentenced Chris to 5 to 20 years gave this boy 7 years for his crime.
Does the punishment fit the crime? A good many judges don't think so, and many of them seek ways to avoid imposing the heavy sentences the law demands. In Seattle, we asked King County Superior Court Judge Stanley Soderlund why the penalties are so severe.
Well, it's exactly a result of having marijuana included under that statute which applies to addictive narcotic drugs. Certainly the problem of people experimenting with marijuana, our youth using marijuana, is a completely different social problem than the underworld sale of addictive narcotics, and ought to be handled on its own basis rather than having a law which says that the penalty for one college boy selling a marijuana cigarette to his 18-year-old buddy is a 20-year minimum sentence in prison. These young people are not stupid. They soon learn that the court, in fact, is not going to give you the minimum 20 years in prison for selling a cigarette to your buddy. They learn that the law is a threat, more severe than courts want to use, more severe than prosecutors want to prosecute, and they learn disrespect for the law because the law is not realistic and uniformly applied. The young person can look the older generation in the eye and say, your law is not fair.
There are many, I think you'll agree, who suggest that the sale of marijuana should be legalized, controlled as the sale of alcohol is, but legalized nonetheless. What do you think?
Well, if I were making the decision, I would not legalize marijuana. I'm in favor of having marijuana illegal and against the law. Now, this is a personal question. I think it's a vice. I think it is not a social good. I think it's a social evil. I think it leads to other social evils. And the argument that we allow some social evils and therefore we should allow more, it doesn't persuade me. I do quarrel, however, with the rigid, restrictive laws applying to marijuana which require us to treat it like we treat heroin and does not give the law enforcement officer, the prosecutor, or the judge the leeway to treat the problem for what it actually is.
Many people think of marijuana as a problem confined to larger cities. It is not. This is Ithaca, New York, population 30,000.